Marcus Wellington III had everything money could buy, except the one thing he wanted most, the ability to walk. Born with spina bifida, the 22-year-old heir to the Wellington fortune had spent his entire life confined to a wheelchair, watching the world from a seated perspective while his father's empire grew around him. The Wellington mansion sprawled across 15 acres of pristine Connecticut countryside, its marble floors echoing with the footsteps of dozens of staff members who maintained the family's opulent lifestyle. Marcus had grown accustomed to the parade of housekeepers, gardeners, and personal assistants who moved through his world like ghosts, performing their duties with quiet efficiency while barely acknowledging his presence. That changed on a crisp October morning when his father, Marcus Wellington II, introduced their new housekeeper. "This is Grace Johnson," his father announced curtly, gesturing toward a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a neat bun. "She, Comey's highly recommended and will be taking over the main house duties." Marcus barely looked up from his tablet, offering only a polite nod. He'd learned long ago not to get attached to the help. They rarely lasted more than 6 months in his father's demanding household. But Grace was different. While other staff members hurried past his wheelchair with averted eyes, Grace always stopped to chat. She asked about his day, his interests, and actually listened to his answers. More importantly, she never spoke to him with the patronizing tone he'd grown to despise, the voice people used when they saw his disability before they saw him. "You know, Mr. Marcus," Grace said one afternoon as she dusted the library where he often spent his time, "my daughter Keisha is about your age. She's studying physical therapy at the university downtown." Marcus looked up from his book, intrigued. Despite himself, physical therapy? That's right. She's always been fascinated by how the human body moves and heals. Says she wants to help people discover what they're truly capable of. Grace paused in her cleaning, her expression thoughtful. "She's been through her own challenges, you know. Born with cerebral palsy. Doctors said she'd never walk properly." "And does she?" Marcus found himself asking. Grace's smile was radiant. "Honey, not only does she walk, she runs. Completed 3 marathons last year." Marcus felt something stir in his chest, a feeling he couldn't quite identify. Hope? Curiosity? He'd been told countless times by specialists that his condition was permanent, that he should focus on adapting to life in a wheelchair rather than pursuing impossible dreams. The next day, Grace brought something unexpected, a photo of her daughter crossing a marathon finish line, her face radiant with joy and determination. "How?" Marcus whispered, staring at the image. "Years of work," Grace said simply. But mostly, she refused to accept limitations that other people tried to place on her. She found doctors who believed in possibilities instead of impossibilities. That evening, Marcus did something he hadn't done in years. He researched. Not the latest tech gadgets or investment opportunities that usually captured his attention, but medical advances in spinal cord treatment, new surgical techniques, experimental therapies. What he discovered astounded him. The field had advanced dramatically in recent years. Stem cell treatments, nerve regeneration research, advanced physical therapy techniques. There were options his doctors had never mentioned, probably because they assumed a wealthy patient would prefer expensive comfort over challenging uncertainty. When Grace arrived for work the next morning, she found Marcus waiting in the foyer, a stack of research papers beside his wheelchair. "I need to meet your daughter," he said without preamble. Grace's eyebrows rose. "Oh, and why's that?" "Because," Marcus said, his voice stronger than it had been in months, "I think I've been asking the wrong questions all my life." 2 weeks later, Keisha Johnson sat across from Marcus in the mansion's sunroom, her direct gaze unflinching as she listened to his story. "So you've never tried any intensive physical therapy?" she asked. "My doctors said it would be pointless, given my specific condition." Kaisha leaned back, shaking her head. "Mr. Marcus, can I be straight with you?" He nodded. "Your doctors were looking at your bank account, not your potential. Rich folks get comfortable treatments that don't challenge them. Poor folks like me get the hard truth, that anything worth having requires work, pain, and probably failure before success." Her words stung, but Marcus recognized their accuracy. His entire life had been cushioned, protected, made easy, except for the one thing that couldn't be bought. "What would you recommend?" he asked. "First, new doctors. Specialists who work with people who can't afford to fail. Second, you need to understand this isn't about miracle cures. It's about discovering what your body can actually do when pushed to its limits." Over the following months, Marcus's world transformed. Against his father's wishes and his previous doctor's advice, he began working with a team of specialists recommended by Kaisha. The regimen was brutal: hours of physical therapy, experimental treatments, and mental conditioning that pushed him beyond every comfort zone he'd ever known. Grace watched the changes with quiet pride, bringing him energy drinks during his home therapy sessions and offering encouragement when frustration overwhelmed him. "Some days I think I'm crazy for trying this," Marcus confessed during one particularly difficult afternoon. "Crazy?" Grace laughed, adjusting the towel around his shoulders as he rested between exercises. "Honey, crazy was accepting other people's limitations as your own truth. This is the sanest thing you've ever done." The breakthrough came on a gray December morning, 6 months after he'd started his new treatment protocol. Marcus was working with his physical therapist in the mansion's converted gym when he felt something different, a tingling sensation in his left leg that he'd never experienced before. "Stop," he whispered, his eyes wide. The therapist immediately "Cease the exercise. What's wrong?" "I felt something." What followed was the most intense hour of Marcus's life. Slowly, carefully, with his therapist supporting him, he managed to shift his weight forward in his wheelchair. His legs, weak and unsteady, began to respond to signals from his brain. It wasn't walking, not yet. But it was movement he controlled. Sensation he could feel, hope he could touch. Grace found him that evening in his room, tears streaming down his face as he stared at his legs. "I felt them move," he whispered. She sat beside him, taking his hand in hers. "This is just the beginning, you know." Marcus nodded, understanding for the first time that the unbelievable thing Grace had shown him wasn't a miracle cure or an instant transformation. It was something far more powerful, the belief that his life didn't have to be defined by other people's expectations. 6 months later, Marcus Wellington III took his first independent steps across the marble foyer of his family's mansion. They were shaky, supported by Walker, and lasted only a few seconds before exhaustion forced him back into his wheelchair. But Grace Johnson and her daughter Kaisha were there to witness it, their faces radiant with the joy of watching someone discover that impossible was often just another word for untried. "You did the unbelievable," Grace said, hugging him tightly. Marcus smiled, understanding now that the real miracle hadn't been learning to walk. It had been learning to believe in his own potential, taught by a woman who saw possibilities where others saw limitations, and who'd raised a daughter to run marathons despite every obstacle placed in her path. Sometimes, the most extraordinary teachers come disguised as ordinary people, carrying within them the power to show us that we're capable of far more than we ever dared imagine.